And nature abhors vacuum. So that vacuum will be filled by something else. So you need, and he gave an image, he said you need to remove that negative habit and substitute it with a positive task.
How do you see that? What are the most common mental blocks for our youth?
At least being inadequate, because people feel that they are perceived as, they are labeled, because they were defense mechanism, they were meant simply to guarantee survival.
Yes.
No, but human beings are not actually looking for mere survival. When they realize there are certain areas in their lives where they are stuck and they cannot move forward or cope with it alone.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Iram Irshad. I welcome you to Iram at Life. The focus of the show is to highlight the value of self-awareness and finding ways how to increase self-knowledge. Also exploring the most authentic and scientific solutions to unlock your psychological and emotional blocks. So the first step is to identify what works in your life, what doesn't work in your life. Find out the reasons behind all these strengths and weaknesses that you are going through, and that will take you to the next step, which means that you are ready to make an action plan. And while you are making an action plan, you may need a coach, you may need a counselor or a mentor or an expert on human psychology, or a person who has enough knowledge to guide you. And this is your opportunity to expand your self-knowledge. This is your opportunity to expand the knowledge of the area that you can discover that what are the resources that I can use to improve my personal development. Today I have invited one of my dearest colleague. I am very happy that Mr. Alessandro is here on my show. Thank you very much for being here.
And thank you for inviting.
And Mr. Alessandro is having such an impressive profile as a counselor, I must say, because he has been practicing for past 10 years or so. He has started his counseling working with students, youth and college students, and he is a student member of British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, and which is recognized as the biggest body for counseling and psychotherapy. Thank you very much. I'm so excited to speak about counseling with you. To start off, I would pose a question, because this is still a new field for Pakistan. So would you like to highlight the need of the counselor here in our culture?
Yes, I totally agree. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's a great opportunity to talk about counseling and related areas. Yeah, I feel the need of counseling emerges when people feel the need to be supported.
Okay.
And so I think there are two reasons why counseling may be needed. One is certain societies witness a kind of demise of traditional support systems.
Right.
And this is, I think, this has been the case in the West. The family, the community has become more fragmented.
Yes.
And so, like, people felt the lack of support.
Right.
And this may be one reason, why people need counseling.
Okay.
Because they need to find support elsewhere.
Right.
Usually, traditionally, it was found either in the family or in the extended family, in the community.
Yes.
It could be in the village, when society was more rural.
True.
And whereas another reason is that I think there is a general trend all over the world, towards people looking towards their own actualization and their own realization as individuals. And I think these also sometimes calls for counseling, because this somehow pushes them out of the traditional structures that were there. Sometimes people feel the need to realize themselves doing something different from what their families have done for centuries, maybe.
Yes, yes.
And in those moments, they might feel alone.
Okay.
They might feel the need for a supportive professional.
Yes, yes. And I was reading somewhere, it was stated that we all human beings have natural tendency to self-actualization.
Yes.
But what actually hampers our personal development is when you put a condition on somebody's worth,
Yes.
and that conditions are usually coming from the loved ones, your parents,
Yes.
your
The
teachers, and your
significant
peers.
others. Yeah.
So that can also be, a reason to go and find a stranger's support, or a person, or maybe
Exactly.
looking for a support outside their closed circle.
Yes, yes.
So I think that can also contribute.
And I would like to elaborate on what you said, because one of my mentors in counseling is Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is one of those who has explored very deeply the conditions of worth, what you were talking about. And I think counseling is about what you said in the beginning. When you realize there are certain areas in your life where you are stuck.
Yes, yes.
I think people might consider, seeing a professional, seeing a support professional, being a counselor or a coach, when they realize there are certain areas in their lives where they are stuck and they cannot move forward or cope with it alone.
Yes, yes.
Or, if not alone, because I think no man is an island, another famous statement. They cannot cope with it using the traditional support systems that are there. Like you usually have a partner in life. If you don't, you will have a network of friends, a network of people with whom you share, and usually those people will be sufficient. Will provide enough support, enough feeling of belonging for you to move ahead.
And I think the people that you go to, their teaching index matter as well, because let's say for relationship you are going to somebody, or maybe for career counseling you are asking somebody's advice, because I think giving advice is like somehow the stepping point where you actually seek a counselor.
Yes.
So maybe their teaching index also an important factor, and then being in that point of unconditional acceptance. I think that can also be a reason that generally we don't find such spaces.
This is I think the most important thing. It's like the counselor, the coach, a support professional is someone who provides a space where there is an unconditional acceptance of the client, of the client in their entirety.
Yes.
So there are no feelings that are taboos, there are no expressions that are prohibited, there is no judgment, which usually is actually the things that blocks many people from expressing themselves.
True.
Because they would be afraid of maybe societal judgment, of maybe moral judgments according to religious values, to traditional values. Counseling and coaching, usually they offer that space in which a person can express the things that they would not be
able to share with others.
Feel free to express. And that is why both for counseling and coaching confidentiality are very important.
Right.
And at the same time, both these professions, they require a strong ethical commitment on the part of the coach or the counselor, because people express themselves and I would say expose their vulnerability during coaching and counseling, and if the coach and the counselor do not work ethically, exploitation may arise. And so that's why there is an ethical code for coaching, for counseling. They are highly ethical professions.
Right.
And because it's a safe space.
True. Let's move on to the next question. That what are the ambits of counseling when you are addressing counseling? That it's a very serious job, because you are dealing with people's very personal, emotional and psychological issues. So would you highlight the ambit of the counseling?
I would say my experience is people may go to counseling for different reasons, and there are various areas where counseling can help. One area where I think counseling is really can really help is to deal with one's own sense of self-esteem or self-worth.
Okay.
Because I think one of the secrets for efficient and effective human relationships is a deep and sound sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And people may even not know that there is a self-esteem issue, and this is actually what I personally, for example, found out when I first went for my own counseling. I realized that there were some areas where I needed to develop my own assertiveness and my own sense of of being enough, of being worthy as a human being, as I was. And I think this is an area where counseling, and I think also coaching in a different way, can help a lot. But I think counseling can really help a person identify the roots of maybe that, where does this lack of, or let's say, not sufficient self-esteem comes from.
Or the root cause, the underlying reason behind that lack.
And usually these things are there present in the unconscious of the person. The person unconsciously know. Right. And I think counseling and psychotherapy can help getting in touch with those. There are different techniques. There are wonderful techniques being developed nowadays.
Yes. So moving on to the next question, that tell us something about that when you are practicing and working with youth, and because larger portion of our population is actually based on youth, and if they are going through some stress and depression, and with this influx of information, where they have so much to compare and contrast, how do you see that, what are the most common mental blocks for our youth?
My experience is, one is exactly this, maybe a sense of inferiority. Maybe this is because I worked with, my work was especially with minorities, and the minority group I worked with mostly didn't belong to the upper class. It was maybe middle class or lower middle class, or some were even, I would say, struggling with meeting life needs. And this, I think, in many of them I found a kind of sense of woundedness, which might be specific to the experience they had in life.
Okay.
Because maybe the way sometimes Pakistan is portrayed abroad, the Pakistani public is very sensitive to this, to the way people outside Pakistan perceive Pakistan and Pakistanis.
Right.
And sometimes this may generate a sense of at least being inadequate, because people feel that they are perceived as, they are labeled. I think my job with many of these youth was helping them going beyond what other people, being Pakistanis or being foreigners or being anywhere in the world, what other people may think of you. So like rely more on your own internal locus of evaluation. Like we have, an internal forum. We have an internal way of evaluating ourselves, and that many times tells us what is.
Okay, I would just interrupt you here for the behavior. I mean, let's say if a person who is going through that feeling of inferiority or feeling of being inadequate, what are the behaviors that surface out of that belief system, and then, I mean, we can direct people or our clients that maybe you need to fix it.
Paradoxically, one thing I have noticed, people who suffer from this sense of inadequacy, they try to show that they are more than adequate. And they usually do this by competing with others, and they don't hesitate sometimes to put down others, because for them it is so important to show that they are better than others, because in this way they kind of can prove to the world that they are adequate. Sometimes they may become also domineering or like aggressive, or maybe, very self-centered in a sense. So like maybe unable to relate to other human beings at a deeper level, because they're too much concerned with their own sense of, unworthiness. And it's like, I would say, there's an example I can give. If you suppose, when you go to the doctor, and you tell the doctor your own issues, obviously you will always be the center of the scene. True. Because you will be thinking about your own issues, and like it would be very difficult for you in that moment to even think about any other person's need.
Very interesting analogy.
and I think maybe the counselor can help in a sense. If going for counseling, for coaching, helps you identify these issues, and then at a certain point it's like, okay, my leg doesn't pain anymore, my psychological leg that was paining. So like if my leg is not paining anymore and you need to carry 6 bottles of water or 6 bottles of water, I can help you.
Exactly.
But until I'm so focused on my own issue, how can I help others? How can I be even aware of some other person's need?
And maybe one indicator can be this also, that when you are doing that defensive mechanism you are picking up, and still you are not harnessing any happiness or peace or self-satisfaction out of it. So maybe then you can realize that maybe the behavior that I chose out of that belief has to be changed because it's not serving me at all.
Yes, and usually these defense mechanisms were learned maybe in early childhood or maybe during infanthood or adolescence or like during our growth process.
True.
And they worked well for a certain time.
True.
Just imagine,
it boosts your ego, it gives you like sense of place in the society.
It actually somehow protects you from harm.
Yes.
Imagine someone who grows in an abusive household.
True.
Where like there is violence, there is abuse, they need to develop defense mechanisms to cope with that situation, which is a situation which is deeply unsafe.
Yes.
The problem is that when you go out into the world and you keep using the defense mechanism which worked well because maybe your parents were aggressive, abusive, but the whole world is not like that. And maybe, for example, with your colleagues at work, you need to develop a cooperative attitude, not just, going there with your shield and with your sword, not defending, So like in that sense, the time will eventually inevitably come where you will realize that you need to drop your defense mechanism.
Yes. And do you think that such defense mechanism can contribute to more negative emotions?
I do think so, especially on the long run.
Resentment,
and, for example.
Being over skeptical and being dismissive of people.
Because they were defense mechanisms, they were meant simply to guarantee survival.
Yes.
No, but human beings are not actually looking for mere survival. They are looking, as you said, for self-actualization.
Yes.
And when you realize that the behavioral patterns you learned are not conducive to self-actualization, you inevitably will develop a resentment because you will tend to compare yourself with people who look more happy, or you simply realize that I am not happy. Because also there is another problem. There are psychological studies that have discovered that when you try to numb one emotion, because you don't want to feel that emotion, suppose that emotion is pain or psychological suffering, you don't want to experience it, you shut it down. You try to shut down that particular feeling. The problem is you cannot shut down feelings selectively. The moment you shut down one feeling, you shut them all down. So you don't allow yourself to experience joy, to experience pleasure, to experience excitement, to experience anticipation. They are all the things that make life beautiful.
So how can we, replace negative emotions with positive ones? I mean,
this is very. I think the answer lies in the question, because I think the answer lies in the word replacing, as you said. I had a friend of mine once was talking to a group of youth, and he was giving them an example. Like, suppose that you have a tendency to be aggressive, and every day you go to school, you hit someone.
Okay.
Now, if you want to stop hitting someone every day, it's not sufficient to say, okay, from today I will not do this, because by simply saying not doing this, you are just creating a vacuum.
Truly.
And nature abhors vacuum. So that vacuum will be filled by something else. So you need, and he gave an image, he said you need to remove that negative habit and substitute it with a positive task.
True.
So for example, he was advising them, go to school every morning and make it a point that today I will greet friendly 5 people.
Oh, wonderful.
So you substitute a negative attitude or behavior with a positive one and a strengthened positive one.
With the equal force that has...
I will say even a superior force. No, you have to greet 5 people, whereas maybe you were hitting only one person.
Right.
So you make it a task. If you want to experience positive emotions instead of negative ones, make it into a task.
All right. So let's move on a little bit further in our discussion. That it's a very common saying. I mean, Viktor Frankl were talking about that people, those who have more meaning in their life, more consciousness in their life, they can resist more adversities and odds of the life. So put some light on finding purpose, or I always put it this way, that how to decode your gift, because
Yes,
I think
yes.
it's your existence, our existence has a reason. So
Yes.
I don't find even a single person who is without any reason here.
Yes.
So how do you see that people generally, how do they discover their gift?
I would say there can be different ways, and I think every person has to find their own way to identify their meaning. But generally, there are people who find meaning in helping others.
Okay.
Like Viktor Frankl himself, he said that after the war, he realized that his own meaning in life was to help other people find their own. Like I think this is. It might seem a very idealistic stance, but deep down it's not, because human beings are relational beings.
Yes, yes.
Actually, we are the only creature on this planet who does not become a human being unless it is in a relationship with other human beings.
True.
And this has been experienced and researched that human beings who were not in touch with other human beings during the early years of their development, they do not develop the typical human characteristics.
True.
So like you need people, you need relationship to become human. And so I would generalize this experiment that was made and these studies that were made with people, with young children who were lost in the jungle, and I would generalize and say, the more you focus on your relationship with other human beings, the more you will become human.
Right.
And so like automatically you will find your purpose in life.
Okay, and now another question comes that if we are saying that having good interpersonal skills and having some benefit, you being the reason of some benefit to the society is actually leading towards happiness, then why we are like struggling with antisocial behavior? And how can we incorporate or inculcate more skills, interpersonal skills, which makes our youth more pro-social?
I would say the reason is that at a deep level is what we were discussing before, no? Like the difficulty in letting go of maybe the shadows of the past. And so like being stuck in some resentful feelings, which then generate maybe these hateful, spiteful, aggressive behaviors, antisocial behaviors. And definitely they do not contribute to an open attitude, because pro-social behavior, relational behavior, openness to relationship means to adopt in life a deep open stance. And openness is scary, unless you have really dealt with your own personal issues. Then you can open up.
Yes,
Otherwise,
it becomes difficult.
It becomes frightening sometimes for many people.
True.
There is also the whole issue of shame. No?
Yes,
If I open up and I show myself the way I am, no, will they see something that they're not supposed to see?
True.
If you think deeply down that you are inadequate, that you are unworthy, that you are not enough, why would you reveal yourself? Why would you open up?
Yes, and I think there is another saying that people would do anything other than, covering and hiding their true self, because they don't like to, reveal their true selves, what actually they feel. Again, it's a social construct, because we live under a very pressurizing world today.
And there's a lot of expectations.
Yes, expectations. So tell me something about how people deal with failures, and what is your observation towards helping people deal better when they encounter any failure? One
common reaction to failure would be to experience a bit of discouragement. There are studies on this, like they made an experiment in the United States, and people who fail to achieve a certain specific goal, they perceived the goal to be more difficult, so automatically they felt, oh, this is more difficult to achieve now, so they felt more challenged, more discouraged towards the possibility of achieving the goal. And then another reaction that I think traditionally was thought to be very conducive to eventual success was self-blaming and self-criticism. Whereas, again, psychological studies, and I will say this very forcefully, the facts are friendly. Studies on psychology, counseling, coaching, studies on human psychology are very helpful, because they open up dimensions.
True.
And like they revealed that a more self-compassionate attitude is more helpful towards overcoming failure. So I would say, if you fail, take it, change the narrative.
The way you interpret the event or the failure.
The failure. Don't tell yourself, I was, okay. Honestly, you can say, for example, suppose you are a student and you failed in an examination. You can honestly tell yourself, I could have given more time to my studies.
Yes.
That is just a realistic, honest approach.
Yes.
But then if you say, okay, I could have given more time to my studies, and then you start saying, I was a stupid guy, I made a mistake, why did I do that, how fool I am, and then you start kind of, throwing yourself in that dark pit.
Yes.
Doesn't help. I would say, if you really honestly think you could have given time to more studies, change the narrative and say, this failure was a learning experience.
Yes.
And the learning is that the minimum time I need to give to my study if I want to succeed is this.
Right.
And so I've learned something and I'm going to apply for the future. And you see, instead of becoming, slave of your past,
True.
You become future oriented, you have a purpose,
Yes.
you find a
Yes.
purpose, and you know how to achieve your goal.
Exactly.
And then you can also realize that maybe there were reasons why you could not give sufficient time to your studies. Maybe there was a tragedy in the family, maybe there wasn't a conducive atmosphere.
So the objective
at home.
evaluation of the situation.
And maybe also finding ways to be self-compassionate, saying, okay, there is also, I could have done better, but there were also things that were like extenuating circumstances, so I should not be too harsh on myself. I'm sure next time I'll do better.
True. Okay, so next question is that what are the most rewarding 3 traits that you have found in the course of your counseling that you think that can breed success, accomplishment and more fulfilling life?
I would say definitely from one great predictor of success when it comes to defining success, I would say as professional success or as success in what you do in life is trait consciousness. Conscientiousness is something that really, which is usually can be expressed as self-discipline.
Yes.
And industriousness, tidiness, being punctual. This is a great predictor of success. And there are people who tend to be more conscientious than others, but it is a skill that can be developed.
Yes.
So you can become more tidy, you can become more industrious.
Yes.
And this is a great predictor of success. At least in Western society, a study has been done that's this is one of the 2 main predictors. I would say if we define success as effective life, which can mean also a life that is fulfilling and leads to happiness, I would say openness and human relationship. So which they go together.
Okay.
So I would say if you look at success from a professional point of view, probably trait conscientiousness is very helpful.
Right.
But if you look at a deeper level, what is going to really make you happy in the long run, I would say openness to experience.
Very interesting. And here comes the last question. I would also like you to discriminate a little bit the difference between coaching and counseling, because let's say people are approaching different help and they should know that what are the differences, and if they are going through some trouble or they are feeling stuck, what is the right person or what is the right help that they can seek?
I would say it's a very thin line.
Yes,
it's a very thin line, because there are many counselors who adopt coaching techniques nowadays, and I think there is no coach who doesn't know the basic counseling techniques, because they are very much intertwined.
Right.
But I would say if a person feels that they need help to cope with the situation,
right,
and they want to explore the reasons why they are in this situation, so like a more explorative and coping type of help, I will say they may opt for a counselor. Whereas if a person is planning to make a step forward, to move forward, and they feel that they want to develop some skills and understand why maybe it's a bit difficult to develop them,
very
then
nice.
I will go
and
for
I think
coaching.
very simple way of expressing the difference. Thank you very much, Alessandro, to be here. And
Welcome.
we
Thank you
have
for inviting.
reached at the end of the show. I hope these profound insights that has been shared by our worthy counselor are like of great help to you, you would utilize it in your practical life. I would just summarize what we have discussed is that minimum you should care for the words and the gestures that you are actually using while interacting with other human beings. I don't know how serious you are about your personal development, but the effort is that we are trying to raise awareness that your words matter, your statement matters, your language that you use for your fellow colleagues and with your friends, with your partners, it has a bearing upon their psychological and emotional climate. So be conscious of that. Always rise and shine. Thank you very much. Keep watching Iram at Life.